Greetings once again as we continue looking at the aspect of making holistic care effective through the Phemegprenistic principle. And as brought out, we are making this to be understood as Phemegprenistic holistic care. In other words, Phemegprenistic principle as an attitudinal guidance principle is one that is developing holistic caregivers to be more effective in the way they do based on particular guiding principles. Now, today I would like to bring out the central proposition really of Phemegprenistic as a principle. It is really bringing out the aspect of making holistic care effective through an attitudinal guidance. In other words, we are saying holistic care can be made effective when it is based on health and moral ethics in counseling, education, and natural mind setting, which is basically nurturing or upbringing. Okay, by developing an attitudinal guidance through psychotherapy rather than psychic manipulation. Now, what kind of psychotherapy is this? Is the point that we're trying to bring in today. This is where Phemegprenistic psychotherapy comes in as a follow-up to the application of Phemegprenism as an integrative philosophy. In other words, holistic care is made effective based on health and moral ethics quite fine in counseling, education, and natural mind setting. But this should be by an attitudinal guidance through Phemegprenistic psychotherapy. In other words, the Phemegprenistic principle actually aims at developing the attitude of the caregiver. Work on the attitude of the caregiver so that this practitioner begins to think in a particular professional way. In other words, Phemegprenistic attitude is what we are working on as one that is based on health and moral ethics. In other words, it's professionalism basically. In other words, you cannot develop one's behavior without developing a particular attitude. And this is where Phemegprenistic is based on the theories of positive integration and interaction. There is interaction between the therapist and the client or patient. But is this interaction positive or negative? Is it one that is constructive or destructive? Right? And so in our proposition, we are saying we can only make holistic care effective based on health and moral ethics in counseling, education, and natural mind setting or nurturing or upbringing when there is attitudinal guidance through Phemegprenistic psychotherapy and not psychic manipulation. And so when we look at the application of Phemegprenism in the society, in the various fields that we've brought out, and particularly in the home as the basic unit of society, we are saying we want to develop a particular attitude in these home care givers who I'm referring to as managers of domestic affairs. What kind of attitude do they have? And this is where attitudinal guidance comes in. How do they think? What is their mindset? Because that is what ultimately determines how they behave and the kind of environment they create for the clients or patients, who in this case we are saying are the offspring or dependents. The ideal environment that Phemegprenism or Phemegprenism actually develops is based on the attitude that the caregivers themselves have. they cannot develop an ideal environment without an appropriate attitude. And so we work on the mindset, work on the attitude through a guiding principle so that they can actually develop skills that will enhance or enable them create an ideal environment that will be responsible, or rather make environmental conditioning a method through psychotherapy, in this case, Phemegprenistic psychotherapy, for the client to respond to as who they are. All right. And so when we move on to look at the development or application of Phemegprenism, it is important, therefore, to consider the central proposition of Phemegpren, that it is attitudinal guidance leading to effective holistic care. Phemegprenism itself has a central proposition, and we are saying effective well-being or human well-being is more than just the issue of absence of disease, but it is holistic, where all areas are actually well kept. But this is based on a realization aspect. And this is where understanding of one's lived experience comes in, deriving meaning of that lived experience, and using the understanding of that meaning into a constructive lifestyle. All right? In other words, you learn something from what you've experienced, understand why you've experienced it, and practically apply it. And so we are saying that this all comes back to an issue of ethics. It all comes back to the issue of professionalism. It all comes back to an issue of orderly behavior. And this is where constructive behavioral change is the ultimate goal of Phemegprenistic eclecticism. We are saying work on our attitude, the attitude that ultimately develops a particular behavior, and this behavior in itself helps us create an ideal environment that will ultimately affect others in a positive way. And so I would like to bring out today, as we think more about Phemegpren, as we think more about Phemegprenism, as we think more about Phemegprenistic eclecticism, to understand the proposition itself. What is it that we are proposing? And as we apply it, what really are we trying to achieve as a whole? Effectiveness implies achievement of a particular goal. But of course, this has to be done efficiently. It has to be done within a particular time frame. And through Phemegprenism, we're bringing out the aspect of each individual being unique, and hence the need for an ideal environment which will be meant or appropriate for that particular individual. And there also has to be an adequate period of time, adequate for a particular individual who is unique, because no two people are exactly the same. And so when dealing with a particular case, it is an issue of us considering each individual as unique, therefore needing a unique ideal environment and requiring an ideal adequate period of time to which they'll be exposed to that ideal environment for them to actually respond in a positive way. And so these are aspects that I would like us to think about even as we continue looking at the application of Phemegprenism in a practical way in various aspects of life. And the home, as brought out, is considered as the basic unit of society, which actually enables us or builds us up, various individuals, through natural mind setting or nurturing or upbringing. This ultimately develops individuals who contribute to society and therefore decide or enable society to what it is.